Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we step into a world of velvet, vermin, and very questionable smells. We're heading straight into the glittering, grimy court of Elizabethan, the Virgin Queen of England. With her towering ruffs, powdered face, and dazzling wit, she commands attention. But don't get too close. Behind the regal grandeur lies a daily reality that's less fairy tale and more festering nightmare. And if you're sensitive to scent, well, they probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is, so drop that in the comments too. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's the late 1500s, and England is rising from medieval shadows into the bold light of the Renaissance. The Protestant Reformation is still echoing through churches and taverns. Across the Channel, Catholic Spain eyes England like a vulture watching a wounded deer. But in London, at the very heart of the action, stands Elizabeth Tudor, regal, radiant, and reigning with fierce independence. She's the monarch of myth, the woman whose image has been burnished into history with portraits, poetry, and plays. But tonight, we aren't gazing at her through a golden frame. We're sneaking behind the tapestries, into her chambers, past the sentries, past the sweet smell of roses. Wait, no, that's not roses. That's something else entirely. Elizabeth's court is, by all appearances, a dream. But the air tells a different story. It's thick, dense. The scent of bodies, breath, unwashed fabric, dried herbs and animal fat candles swirls together in a uniquely Tudor bouquet. This is not a place for the faint-nosed. The royal apartments in Whitehall Palace glitter with candlelight bouncing off gold leaf ceilings. Tapestries hang thick on the walls, not for decoration, but insulation. There's no central heating after all, and England gets damp. Beneath her feet, rushes cover the floor layered with dried flowers and herbs, lavender, mint, marjoram, intended to mask the stench of spoiled food, bodily waste, and something distinctly rodent-like. These rushes aren't cleaned often, just replaced. Sometimes, maybe. In this fragrant fog steps Elizabeth, the carefully choreographed centre of attention. Her white lead makeup glows in the low light, thickly applied over skin that has seen little water in months. A finely embroidered gown cascades from her shoulders, but if you dared to press your nose to the fabric, you'd likely regret it. That dress has soaked up years of sweat, perfume, and who knows what from the Tudor air. But we'll get to her wardrobe disasters later. For now, we focus on the Queen's presence. Regal and commanding, yes, but beneath that facade an unavoidable truth. She stinks, and so does everyone else. Elizabeth's hygiene practices, or lack thereof, were not particularly shocking by the standards of her time. In fact, she may have been considered fairly clean. In 16th century England, cleanliness did not mean daily showers or even weekly ones. It meant avoiding filth that might make you sick, and ironically, people thought water could cause illness by opening the pores and letting in bad airs, so bathing was approached cautiously, like someone might approach a rabid goose. Still, the Queen made a valiant attempt to smell good, or at least better. Her rooms were often filled with pomanders, decorative balls filled with spices and resins like ambergris, musk, and civet. These weren't just for aesthetics, they were olfactory armour. When she moved through her court, she trailed behind her a wake of intense fragrance. The 16th century equivalent of someone bathing in Chanel No. 5 to cover up the fact that they haven't showered in weeks. Visitors often commented on the Queen's radiance, her wit, her glittering wardrobe. Few mentioned her smell. That's probably because they were too polite, or because they smelled just as bad. After all, the average noble might only bathe a handful of times per year. Elizabeth, by some accounts, bathed once a month whether she needed it or not. Which might sound like a joke, but was reportedly true. Even that rare luxury of bathing wasn't what we'd consider a real bath. No soap suds, no bubble baths, no eucalyptus-scented candles. Instead, she would soak in a wooden tub lined with linen, filled with hot water heated in copper pots. Sometimes herbs were added, but no actual soap was used. The bathwater would be reused, because why waste good hot water? And the linen lining helped protect her delicate skin from splinters and the wood's natural oils. A luxury, sure, but not exactly refreshing. The people closest to her weren't immune to this olfactory onslaught. Her ladies-in-waiting, servants, and doctors, especially the poor souls who helped apply her makeup or arrange her hair, had front-row seats to the Queen's scent. But again, context is everything. These were people who lived in a time where animal dung was a standard street decoration, and the Thames functioned as both a water source and a sewer. A little body odour didn't shock anyone. Yet even in this grime-loving era, Elizabeth's regime stood out in its own pungent way. Her obsessive image management meant she masked the realities of her body with increasing desperation as she aged. The perfumes became heavier, the makeup thicker, the layers of clothing more elaborate. By the time she reached her 60s, she was a walking olfactory fortress. One historians still debate whether it actually helped or just trapped everything inside. Here's a little fringe tidbit for you. Some accounts claim Elizabeth had her own personal scenters, servants tasked specifically with preparing and managing her perfumes. Not just for her body, but for her rooms, gloves, fans, even letters. Scent was power, and Elizabeth wielded it like a sword dipped in rose oil. Of course it wasn't all glamour and musk. There were slips. Rumours of foul breath, of yellowed fingers, of once gleaming gowns that began to crack with dried sweat and cosmetics. But she remained fiercely private. Mirrors were removed from her rooms late in life. Servants were sworn to silence. Portraits were strictly controlled. If the world ever caught a whiff of the real Elizabeth, it certainly wasn't from her own camp. And here's where it gets even murkier. Some modern historians argue that the Queen's hygiene wasn't significantly worse than anyone else's. They say that the obsession with her supposed filth is a modern projection, a result of comparing her world to ours. After all, she lived into her 70s, impressive by Tudor standards. She avoided major plagues. Her teeth, while horrifying by our standards, stayed mostly in her head. Could she really have been that unclean? Others counter, surviving isn't the same as thriving, and the lengths she went to avoid public vulnerability, like hiding illness or toothaches, suggest a woman very aware that any weakness, even a foul odour, could unravel her image. Let's not forget that Elizabeth was playing a high-stakes game. As an unmarried queen, her body wasn't just hers. It was a symbol, a political tool, an object of constant scrutiny. Every curl of her wig, every fold of her gown, every note of her perfume had to tell a story. The story of England, glorious, pure, divine. Even if, just out of frame, a rat scurried past a pot of lavender-scented water. She may reign in majesty, but when it comes to bathing, Elizabeth lives by the mantra, less is more, especially when it comes to water. In fact, she's got something of a reputation. It's not the kind you boast about at banquets, but it lingers, much like the scent she so carefully tries to disguise. Her Majesty is not a fan of baths, not regular ones anyway. At the heart of this peculiar practice lies a Tudor fear older than the Queen herself, that water, particularly hot water, could kill you. A belief so strong, so stubborn, it survived well into the 17th century. People honestly thought that opening your pores with warm water allowed miasma, poisonous airs, to sneak into your body and wreak havoc from within. Better to stay dry, maybe splash a little rosewater on your face, and hope your natural oils did the rest. Skin, after all, was thought to protect the soul. Strip it too often, and you might strip away your health, your beauty, even your very essence. Elizabeth's solution to this invisible threat? Scheduled bathing with a strong preference for the word occasionally. She's believed to have said, either directly or through hearsay, that she bathed once a month whether she needed it or not. And while some scholars still debate the exact frequency, even once a month made her seem almost daring by contemporary standards. Picture it, a grand wooden tub hauled into her private chambers, lined with soft linen to protect royal skin. Water heated in kettles over fire, infused with herbs like thyme, sage or rosemary to cleanse the humours. 2 or 3 ladies in waiting scurrying about, carrying towels, folding clothes, possibly holding their breath. The Queen steps in, carefully, with attendants shielding her from draughts, which were also thought to cause deadly illness. She lowers herself into the steaming bath and rests momentarily in what passes for cleanliness in her era. Then, as quickly as it began, the ritual ends. She's towelled off, dusted with powders, redressed, and perfumed like a roast pheasant about to be served. But water isn't the only thing Elizabeth avoids. Soap, in the way we know it today, is not part of her routine. Tudor-era soaps are lye-based, strong and deeply drying, more likely to remove layers of skin than gently cleanse it. Instead, washing means wiping. Basins of water with cloths, gently dabbed across hands, neck or face. For serious dirt, a bit of ground pumice or vinegar might do the trick, but overall the goal is to freshen, not scrub. The idea of a long, luxurious soak with aromatic oils, that's Roman decadence, and quite possibly the road to ruin. Her courtiers follow suit, or rather, they don't suit, at least not in the way of frequent washing. Nobles may spend hours dressing and grooming, but rarely involve water in the process. Instead, they rely on scented gloves, floral sachets sewn into clothing, and scented oils rubbed behind ears and across the chest. Cleanliness to them means looking neat and smelling floral. If you can pass the sniff test at court without fainting, you're doing just fine. This perspective is hardly unique to England. Across Europe, bathing has fallen from grace. Public bathhouses, once bustling centres of social hygiene during the Middle Ages, have become suspect, associated with sin, disease, and immorality. Many were closed after the plague outbreaks of the 14th century. Others became dens of vice, more brothel than bathhouse, and so the pendulum swung. Where once people bathed communally and frequently, now they feared even touching water. Elizabeth, ever the pragmatist, likely balanced her desire to remain healthy with the need to maintain appearances, hence the monthly bath. But the aftercare was where she really shined. Layers upon layers of linen undergarments absorbed sweat and body oils. These were changed often, sometimes daily, earning linen a reputation as the true cleanser of the age. Changing one's shirt became synonymous with washing oneself. It was, in the Queen's view, safer and just as effective as any bath. Still, some cracks form in this logic, especially when illness strikes. One of the fringe accounts from Elizabeth's inner circle suggests that during times of stress or sickness, she might go even longer without bathing, believing that her body's strength would be weakened by cleansing. Imagine, then, the subtle panic among her attendants. Already overpowered by musk and myrrh, now with added stress sweat and days-old pomander residue. A scent so complex it probably deserved its own sonnet. Yet somehow she maintains an aura of power and beauty. Perhaps it's the confidence, perhaps it's the careful choreography of her appearances, or perhaps it's that everyone around her smells just as medieval. The stink was democratic. And it wasn't just the people. The royal palaces themselves seemed to conspire against the idea of freshness. Whitehall, Greenwich, Hampton Court, each an architectural marvel, each severely lacking in drainage. Floors were layered with rushes to absorb spills, which also absorbed everything else. Imagine walking through a hall lined with year-old herbs, crushed underfoot by hundreds of courtiers in heavy boots. Dust, rodent droppings, bits of food, all mingling into what some modern archaeologists have described as organic flooring. An interior decorator's nightmare, a bacterium's paradise. Still, the Queen perseveres. She holds her court with grace, conducts affairs of state, dances in velvet gowns, and dazzles foreign dignitaries. All the while, her skin rarely meets water. She becomes something of a legend, not just in policy or poetry, but in her presentation. That unmistakable white face, those painted lips, the towering wig, a mask, a shield, a fortress of fashion protecting the woman beneath. And it's that mask that starts to slip ever so slightly as the years go on. The physical cost of her aversion to bathing, her dependency on heavy cosmetics, and her obsession with privacy begins to show. Her skin, beneath the lead-based cirrus, becomes pocked and scarred. Her hair, once auburn, gives way to full wigs after a bout of illness, and stress causes dramatic hair loss. But still she refuses to reveal vulnerability. Still she clings to the monthly routine, the perfumes, the powder, the carefully selected linen. Because for Elizabeth, cleanliness isn't about being clean. It's about being seen, about being the body politic. A woman who becomes more myth than monarch with each passing year. And if the price of that myth is a bath only every 30 days or so, well, she's willing to pay it. To the modern mind, her habits might seem horrifying. But to her subjects, she was divine, a walking miracle, and miracles don't need to wash. From beneath her gilded crown and carefully pinned curls, Elizabeth I carries a secret that not even her most flattering portraits dare to whisper. Beneath those elaborate wigs, beneath the carefully arranged curls of red gold hair that glow in torchlight and candle flame, lies a scalp that tells a very different story. It is a world teeming with tiny unwelcome guests, the kind of company that makes even the most stoic historian twitch. Yes, lice. Or, to be polite, head inhabitants, as some Elizabethan euphemisms might suggest. For while Elizabeth herself is famously meticulous about her image, there is one battlefield she cannot quite conquer, her own scalp. Hair hygiene in the 16th century is, frankly, a losing war for almost everyone. Wigs are not simply a fashion statement, they are a practical necessity. The average Tudor head is a paradise for lice, nits and fleas. These creatures aren't just nuisances, they are full-time residents. Nobles, commoners, even royalty, all scratch beneath their hats and hoods. Combs are used, yes, but often not enough. And shampoo? That's not a thing. Oils and powders help some, but mostly hair is left alone or hidden under layers. So Elizabeth, determined to remain untouchable and divine, embraces the wig with the zeal of someone who knows what's at stake. Her natural hair, once a lively reddish hue inherited from her father, Henry VIII, begins to thin early. Whether from stress, illness, or overuse of cosmetics, it fades from sight. In its place, finely crafted wigs, curled and coloured to perfection, dusted lightly with fragrant powder, and kept in immaculate rows in her private chambers. Her wig makers, possibly among the most trusted of her inner circle, are tasked with ensuring that no strand is out of place. And yet, even wigs have their own set of problems. The heat under them, the sweat, the inability to properly clean the scalp underneath, the occasional intrusion of live, wriggling company. Attendants occasionally find themselves discreetly combing the Queen's head, delicately removing any small white specks. A task requiring discretion, a steady hand, and a nose for not asking too many questions. Because let's be honest, lice don't care about titles. They find warmth, darkness, and the security of an unwashed scalp to be more than enough reason to settle in. Elizabeth's obsession with cleanliness, at least in the visual sense, doesn't translate to modern standards of sanitation, and that means the tiny tenants thrive. Occasionally she'll use vinegar or herbal oils, perhaps rosemary or pennyroyal, as lice deterrents. These concoctions sting and smell strong, but they are the best the era has to offer. Some physicians even suggest mercury as a lice remedy, which, as we'll later see, becomes a recurring theme in her skincare regimen, much to the detriment of her health. Fringe anecdotes abound of Elizabeth scratching beneath her ornate ruffs during council meetings or demanding stronger perfumes in summer months, perhaps a hint that her powdered headwear isn't foolproof. Court whispers, carefully phrased and passed from servant to servant, mention combings that reveal more than just dust. Yet, as with everything in Elizabeth's life, image takes precedence. Portraits of her from every decade show the same thick, flaming curls. Artists are instructed to maintain the illusion. In fact, she famously decrees that no painter may portray her without official approval, ensuring that even as her real hair disappears, her symbolic hair, the hair of Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, remains ageless. The Queen's court, meanwhile, follows her lead. Wigs and false hair become all the rage. Nobles pile curls upon curls, sometimes using animal hair mixed with human strands. This too is a veritable zoo of parasites. Lice, mites, and even the occasional flea ride along on elaborate headdresses, hidden behind peacock feathers and pearl pins. Hair becomes less about function, and more about fortress building. If your scalp itches, you scratch in private and smile in public. One particularly popular item of the time is the ear iron, a thin rod used to scratch beneath wigs and headpieces without removing them. Picture a dignified noble discreetly slipping one behind a ruff at the banquet table, casually reaching the unreachable. It's etiquette meets infestation, Tudor style. It gets weirder. Among fringe treatments for lice infestations, some recipes include crushed herbs mixed with animal fats, spread thickly across the scalp overnight and then combed out. Others suggest wearing a linen cap soaked in vinegar while sleeping. Did Elizabeth try these? Possibly. She was nothing if not experimental when it came to preserving her carefully managed image. But any discomfort was surely hidden behind layers of pearls, confidence, and diplomacy. The scholars still argue, did Elizabeth truly suffer more than her peers from lice? Or was she simply more visible? Was her dependence on wigs a matter of vanity, or an unfortunate necessity driven by parasites and illness? Some suggest her early hair loss was a result of childhood illnesses like smallpox or typhus. Others blame lead poisoning from her infamous cosmetics. Still others whisper about stress. After all, being the unmarried ruler of a kingdom full of religious fanatics, scheming nobles and jealous suitors can't be easy on the follicles. Regardless of the cause, the result is the same. The real Elizabeth disappears under wigs and paint, layer by layer, until what remains is something more symbol than person. Her hair, like her reign, is constructed and maintained with ruthless attention to detail, and just like her policies, it hides a tumultuous reality beneath a polished exterior, and so the Queen goes about her duties, inspecting troops, entertaining ambassadors, dancing at masques, with her head held high, quite literally. Her wigs are tall, her posture precise, but under all the glitz and gold lies the silent truth of Tudor hygiene. Even queens get lice. They just hide it better than most. It's worth noting that Elizabeth's hair troubles do not prevent her from using it strategically. She commissions paintings that highlight her golden curls as symbols of eternal youth. She grants locks of her hair to favourites as tokens of affection. A deeply intimate gesture, considering how scarce and precious those strands may have been. These gifts become treasured relics, encased in lockets and ring bezels, passed down for generations. Imagine that, a tiny memento of royal hair, perhaps housing a few microscopic friends along with it. Yet even these tokens feed the legend. Elizabeth remains untouchable, unblemished, unbowed. Her court sees the wig, not the woman. Her people see the icon, not the irritation. Of course it wasn't just her head that was a battleground. The lice didn't restrict themselves to royal scalps. Body lice were common, burrowing into seams of undergarments, nesting in the folds of heavy gowns. Elizabeth again relies on linen, multiple layers change frequently, to try to create a barrier. Her laundry staff works overtime, boiling her linen smocks in vinegar and lye, scrubbing until the cloth is nearly threadbare. And still, the tiny invaders return. Because in the end, this isn't just a story about one queen's struggle with headbugs. It's a story of an entire era battling nature with powders, perfumes, and layers of illusion. It's about how even the most powerful woman in the world had to share her crown with creatures no bigger than a sesame seed. But she doesn't flinch. She doesn't falter. She simply adds another pin, another pearl, another puff of lavender powder, and carries on. The glittering gowns and towering wigs of Elizabeth might distract the untrained eye, but a closer look, say one brave enough to peer past the Queen's painted lips, reveals a battlefield far less glamorous. A glance into her mouth, had anyone dared, would have shown a terrain pocked with decay, streaked with darkened enamel, and haunted by the steady toll of sugar. Elizabeth's dental misfortunes are legendary, and like much of her personal hygiene, they reflect both the peculiar standards of the Tudor age and the relentless demands of maintaining royal image. While her skin is powdered, her hair replaced, and her scent weaponized with perfumes, her teeth are a more stubborn foe. There's only so much even a queen can do when rot sets in. At the heart of it all is a simple, seemingly innocent vice: sugar. The sweet substance pours into England in barrels from Caribbean plantations and Portuguese traders. By Elizabeth's reign, sugar has transformed from exotic rarity to status symbol. The wealthy, especially the royals, consume it with unrestrained delight. And Elizabeth, with her famously indulgent palate, is no exception. She loves candied fruits, sugar sculptures, marzipan creations, and something called sucket, a syrupy preserve of fruit soaked in sugar syrup. During banquets, sugar becomes centerpiece, delicacy, and disguise. It's sculpted into edible flowers, buildings, and even portraits, and she eats it all. The results are predictable. By middle age, Elizabeth's teeth begin to betray her. They turn black, some loosen, others disappear entirely. Chronic pain creeps in. It's said that her breath, once sweetened by rosewater rinses, grows foul. Her courtiers grow increasingly skilled at flattery that avoids eye contact with her mouth. Contemporary observers note the Queen's dental decline with a mixture of awe and horror. One famously recorded that Her Majesty's teeth are black, a defect the English seem to take little notice of. Whether this was a cultural blind spot or a polite dodge, it's hard to say. But it's true that dental decay was widespread, even among the nobility. Clean, white teeth were not yet a standard of beauty. In fact, blackened teeth were sometimes considered fashionable, a subtle sign that one could afford sugar. Still, Elizabeth's condition was extreme. To manage the situation, the Queen turns to early dental remedies, many of which sound more like dares than treatments. Her most consistent method of care involves a mixture of crushed pumice, burnt rosemary, and honey, a paste rubbed on with cloth, or occasionally a toothpick carved from silver or bone. Toothbrushes, as we know them, won't become popular until the 18th century, so she scrubs gently and only occasionally, careful not to dislodge any already wobbly enamel. There's even a rumour, never fully confirmed, that one of Elizabeth's doctors had to strap her to a chair in order to extract a rotten tooth. So great was her pain, and so deep her fear. The story goes that a bishop, in an act of loyalty, or madness, had one of his own teeth pulled first to reassure her. Whether true or apocryphal, it captures something essential about Elizabeth: her stubbornness. She endured the pain for years, hiding it as best she could, retreating from public meals, favouring soft foods, speaking carefully. As the rot advances, she leans harder on rosewater. This fragrant rinse, part dental cleanser, part perfume, is kept in decorative vials at her side. After meals, or when preparing for council, she dabs her lips and tongue with it. Some recipes also include vinegar, cloves, and mint, meant to kill mouth odour and preserve dignity. But they only mask the decay. They don't cure it. In portraits, her teeth are conspicuously absent, closed mouths, tight-lipped expressions, shadows painted just so. Elizabeth tightly controls which portraits are allowed, and those that escape her censorship are sometimes altered posthumously. One image in particular shows a smiling, radiant queen, but historians believe the smile was painted decades after her death, when rose-tinted nostalgia softened the truth. And it's not just aesthetics. Dental decay in Elizabeth's time carries far more than cosmetic consequences. Without antibiotics or antiseptics, a rotten tooth can lead to abscesses, infections, and even death. The medical knowledge of the time encourages dangerous interventions, lancing gums to release bad humours, rubbing teeth with mercury-laced ointments, even swallowing crushed coral as a kind of calcium supplement. All these treatments, administered in dimly lit rooms by men in stiff collars, offer little relief and great risk. Even within the royal household, dental care is viewed more as damage control than prevention. There are no court dentists, but there are physicians, barbers, and the occasional itinerant tooth puller who offers their services to staff and nobles. They travel with leather rolls of instruments, hooks, files, and pliers that resemble medieval torture, tools more than anything dental. If Elizabeth needed one, she likely summoned her most trusted physician and endured the ordeal in private. Very private. As she grows older, she begins to eat less in public. Meals are held behind closed doors. She avoids hard food, preferring soft puddings, mashed vegetables, and soaked bread. Court banquets go on without her, or with her making only a brief appearance. At the height of her power, the Queen is increasingly withdrawn from the one thing everyone must do: eat. And still, she is admired. Poets write verses praising her breath, her beauty, her radiant smile. Foreign ambassadors bow and kiss her gloved hand, carefully avoiding the space just inches above it. Suitors, real and political, praise her charms without acknowledging the very human struggles beneath. Even her closest companions learn not to speak of her mouth, her reluctance to eat, or the quiet moments of discomfort when she winces at the wrong touch of a spoon. Some fringe accounts claim she used powdered pearls to whiten her teeth. Others suggest she dabbled with early dental prosthetics, false teeth made of ivory or bone fastened with wire. But these would have been highly experimental, painful, and largely ineffective. Most likely she simply adapted, withdrew, tightened her lips, adjusted the angle of her head, spoke through clenched teeth. It's worth noting that Elizabeth's dental woes weren't unique. Her contemporaries, including many of her noblemen and ladies, suffered the same fate. Sugar, after all, was addictive, delicious, and ever more available. By the late 1500s, even the middle classes were beginning to indulge. England's collective smile was fading. Still, Elizabeth's case is extraordinary because of her visibility, and the effort it took to maintain illusion. Imagine the pressure. Every painting, every speech, every marriage negotiation rested on her image. A blackened tooth, a bad breath, a visible wince. These could unravel decades of diplomacy. In a world where queens were expected to embody perfection, she had no room for dental fragility. So, she powered through, painting her lips, powdering her face, and surrounding herself with loyalists who understood that some things were never to be mentioned. And all the while, beneath it all, her teeth ached. But she was a queen, and queens don't flinch. Her face glows pale in the torchlight, unnaturally pale. Spectral, some might say, as if she's a figure from myth rather than flesh and blood. The skin is smooth, too smooth. The kind of smoothness that only comes from layers of paint, powders, and a cocktail of dangerous ingredients that modern dermatologists would sooner scream at than study. This is the face of Elizabethan, made up not merely for beauty but as a political statement, a mask of control crafted from lead, vinegar, and ambition. It begins innocently enough. In her youth, Elizabeth has a naturally fair complexion, but then comes the smallpox. In 1562, the Queen falls gravely ill, her survival uncertain for days. Against all odds, she recovers, but her face does not. Smallpox leaves behind pitted scars on her cheeks and temples. For a monarch whose image is inseparable from her authority, these blemishes present a problem. The solution? Cover them up, thoroughly. And thus begins her lifelong love affair with ceruse, a mixture of white lead and vinegar, known even in her day to be unhealthy, but beloved for its striking results. Applied daily, ceruse turns the skin an ethereal white. It hides discoloration, scars, and wrinkles. It also seeps into the pores, causes inflammation, and over time slowly poisons the wearer. Lead builds in the body, attacking organs, muddling thoughts, and weakening the skin it initially perfects. Yet Elizabeth persists. To falter in her appearance is to risk unravelling the entire illusion of the Gloriana myth, the ageless, untouched, almost divine Queen of England. Her ritual begins each morning and can take hours. First, the base layer of ceruse. Applied with a soft cloth or sponge, it forms a thick, ghostly canvas. Over that, she dusts a powder of crushed pearls for shimmer, perhaps ground alabaster for added brightness. Her cheeks are tinted with vermilion, a vibrant red derived from mercury sulfide. Mercury, another poison, but again, a poison with results. Her lips are outlined with cochineal, a pigment made from crushed beetles imported from the Americas. Her eyes might receive a faint touch of coal, lead-based again, or soot. Her eyebrows, plucked to near nothing, are penciled in, sometimes with charcoal, sometimes with mouse fur glued into place. Yes, really. The result? A face that glows like moonlight in the candlelit court, porcelain smooth, unblemished, timeless. A face meant not to charm, but to awe, and it works. Her courtiers write sonnets to her beauty. Foreign ambassadors marvel at her poise. The people, many of whom never glimpse her in person, whisper tales of her godlike elegance. Her portraits, carefully vetted and widely copied, reinforce the image. The Virgin Queen, radiant and regal. But up close, the illusion starts to crack. Literally. Ceruse dries and flakes. Over time it hardens, forming a brittle crust that must be reapplied and patched throughout the day. It settles into fine lines and creases, emphasizing what it seeks to hide. Removing it is worse. It requires vinegar, sometimes mixed with alum or eggshell powder. The mixture stings, peels, and strips away healthy skin along with the paint. And yet, Elizabeth repeats the process day after day, year after year. The toll becomes visible. Her skin thins, reddens beneath the layers. Wounds form. Historians debate whether her famously reclusive later years were driven by age, illness, or sheer desire to hide the worsening effects of her cosmetics. Perhaps all three. Fringe accounts suggest sores beneath the makeup, raw patches that would not heal. Some speculate that her immune system, already strained by stress and age, suffered further from constant lead exposure. There's a strange irony here. The very concoction she uses to appear young hastens her aging. The lead breaks down collagen, creating wrinkles and sagging. The mercury attacks her nervous system, potentially affecting her memory, moods, and motor skills. Yet she never abandons it, never once appears in public without her painted armour. Because in her world, appearance is not vanity. It is governance. Her painted face becomes a political weapon, just as potent as any sword or treaty. In a court where men plot, ambassadors scheme, and foreign powers salivate at the idea of a weak English throne, Elizabeth cannot afford to be seen as old or ill. Her makeup is both deception and defence. Her ladies-in-waiting, ever watchful, maintain her ritual with military precision. They learn to blend, to apply, to remove the toxic paste with minimal harm. They become artists of illusion, and they learn not to speak of what lies beneath. As her reign continues, Elizabeth's look becomes iconic. She doubles down on the aesthetic. The high lace ruffs that frame her face like a halo, the elaborate jewels that draw attention away from fine lines and sunken eyes. Everything about her presentation says power, even as the woman beneath grows increasingly frail. There are whispers, of course. Behind closed doors, some courtiers murmur about her health, her habits. One visiting diplomat writes that her face must be rebuilt each morning. Another notes the contrast between her public face and her private moments when the mask briefly slips. But these accounts are few and scattered. Most keep their observations to themselves, if they value their positions. Still, historians today debate the extent of the damage. Was Elizabeth truly poisoned by her makeup? Did it shorten her life? Did it cloud her judgment? Some argue that lead poisoning symptoms, fatigue, tremors, mood swings, match what little we know of her final years. Others suggest her remarkable longevity, dying at age 69, proves she managed the risk. But even skeptics concede her devotion to dangerous cosmetics was unmatched. There's even a fringe theory, half history, half ghost story, that her final days saw her refusing to remove the makeup entirely. That the mask had become permanent, that the Queen died not just wearing cerus, but almost encased in it, her skin unable to breathe beneath years of toxic build-up. It's unlikely, but chilling nonetheless. And then there's the symbolism. Lead-white faces had long been associated with nobility and detachment. In Japan, geishas used rice powder for similar reasons. In Europe, the paler the skin, the less likely you were to labour outdoors. For Elizabeth, whose virginity was national policy, the ghostly pallor underscored her status as both above and apart, untouched by mortal concerns. Even her enemies acknowledged the power of her image. Catholic propagandists, desperate to undermine her, accused her of vanity, witchcraft and worse, but they never denied her presence. Whether loved or loathed, she captivated. It's telling that after her death, when the mask was no longer needed, the reality beneath shocked those who saw her body. The vibrant Queen was gone. In her place, a frail painted husk, a woman whose devotion to illusion had cost her dearly. Yet to the world she remained the radiant monarch of portraits. Her funeral effigy bore her youthful likeness, untouched by time or toxins. Her legacy, like her face, was carefully managed. And even now, centuries later, we remember the white face, the red lips, the distant gaze. We remember the woman who turned makeup into monarchy, a queen whose skin may have betrayed her, but whose legend never did. The gowns shimmer in torchlight, thick with gold thread, dripping with pearls, layered upon layered like the petals of some surreal satin-drenched flower. Elizabeth I stands resplendent, a vision of power, majesty, and divine right. But get too close, just a bit too close, and that vision reveals a darker truth. The dress, for all its glory, smells, not sharply like perfume or polish, but deeply like time. It smells of sweat and starch, of dust and enclosed spaces, of fabrics that have never met the cleansing touch of water. Because here's the dirty secret. Elizabeth's clothes, no matter how opulent, are almost never washed. In the 16th century, laundering fine garments is not just impractical, it's nearly impossible. The Queen's gowns are handcrafted masterpieces, some of them worth small fortunes, made of materials that warp, stretch and fall apart when exposed to water. Velvet, brocade, silk and cloth of gold do not respond kindly to soap. Their dyes run, their stitching loosens and their structure suffers irreparable damage. In short, washing them would be tantamount to destroying them, so they aren't washed. Instead, Elizabeth's wardrobe is maintained through a system of brushing, airing, patching and perfuming. Her laundresses use stiff brushes to remove surface dust. They turn the garments inside out and beat them gently, or leave them to hang near open windows, careful not to let the sun fade the fabric. Herbs are sewn into the folds, lavender, thyme or rose petals to mask any stubborn odours. But these are surface treatments, cosmetic at best. The deeper scents, the ones born of long days in a crowded court and long nights under heavy bodices, remain. Each gown, once worn, is carefully stored in cedar chests or lined closets. Elizabeth owns hundreds. Some are so elaborately structured they can indeed stand up on their own. But their beauty is deceptive. The embroidery hides stains, the lace conceals wear. The stiffness masks the fact that the garment hasn't touched water in years, possibly decades. This isn't unique to Elizabeth. Nobility across Europe follow similar practices. Clothes are status symbols and their care is an art form. The focus is on maintenance, not cleanliness. Linen undergarments, smocks, shifts, chemises, are worn beneath these majestic gowns to absorb sweat and body oils. These underlayers are washed regularly, boiled and scrubbed with harsh soaps. They act as a barrier between the body and the uncleanable garments above. Elizabeth, always mindful of image, changes her linen layers often, daily, sometimes multiple times a day. Her maids ensure her shifts are fresh, her sleeves unstained, her collars crisp. But the gowns themselves? Those are sacred. To wash them would be to court disaster. And so, the layers build. It's not uncommon for the Queen to wear 5 or 6 layers at once, a shift, a corset, a farthingale to shape the skirt, a petticoat, an underskirt, an overgown. And then the outermost robe, often weighing upwards of 20 pounds. All cinched, stitched, and arranged with the precision of a military campaign. Imagine the heat, the restriction, the sheer weight of it. In summer, the layers become suffocating. In winter, they trap warmth, along with everything else. And all the while, the fabric soaks in the day's work, nervous sweat during negotiations, perfume from ceremonial processions, crumbs from banquets, dust from court dances, and the occasional unfortunate smear from a rushed meal or misplaced inkwell. These garments are marvels, but they are also museums of scent. Historians have occasionally been lucky enough to examine surviving pieces of Elizabeth's wardrobe. The details are astonishing. Hand-stitched seams, hidden messages, personalised emblems. But what they never reveal is the olfactory history. That part has faded with time, though likely it took decades to dissipate. It's also worth noting that these gowns were rarely worn more than once for major events. Elizabeth had enough clothing to ensure a near-constant rotation, especially in her younger years. But as she aged, she grew more attached to certain favourite styles and pieces. Some fringe accounts suggest she had particular gowns she returned to often, ones she believed brought her luck or made her look more youthful. And so, over time, these favoured outfits grew increasingly personal. Imagine a gown worn a dozen times over a few months, never washed, layered over perfumed linen, brushed but never cleaned. The scent wouldn't just be sweat. It would be her body chemistry, her diet, her perfume, her illness, if any, her stress. That gown, stored in a cedar chest for a generation, would carry more than fashion history. It would carry biography. In her later years, Elizabeth's relationship with her wardrobe becomes more symbolic. The rich reds and golds give way to paler hues, white, silver, ivory. She becomes a living myth, cloaked in moonlight. Her gowns are no longer simply clothing, they are statements. Each pearl sewn into her bodice signifies purity. Each embroidery pattern tells a story. A phoenix here symbolising rebirth, an ermine there denoting royalty and incorruptibility, and beneath it all still unwashed. Of course, Elizabeth is not oblivious to the implications. She surrounds herself with herbs, perfumes and scented gloves. Her rooms are lined with dried flowers and pomanders. She insists on cleanliness from her attendants, even if her definition of clean differs dramatically from ours. Her bedding is changed often, her underlayers are spotless, but the outer garments, they remain pristine only in appearance. Some of her contemporaries notice. One foreign ambassador famously commented that Her Majesty's garments are always pleasing to the eye, but not always to the nose. A backhanded compliment, perhaps, or an honest reflection of a court where scent is part of the architecture. Yet no one dares speak too directly. To criticise the Queen's clothing is to criticise the Queen herself, and in Elizabeth's court, image is sacred. It's not just her dresses either. Her accessories, the ruffs, gloves, slippers, follow the same pattern. Cleaned, aired, perfumed, but never truly laundered. Ruffs, those starched collars that encircle her neck like the rings of Saturn, are notoriously high maintenance. They require daily starching and ironing, but never a good scrub. They yellow with time and must be replaced or dyed to hide the change. Gloves are soaked in scented oils, jasmine, orange blossom, civet, but the leather is never cleaned. The result is a constant tension between beauty and decay. In some ways, it's poetic. Elizabeth's reign is one of contradictions. She's a virgin queen surrounded by suitors, a warrior monarch who rarely leaves her palace, a divine figure clinging to earthly comforts. Her clothes, radiant yet unwashed, reflect that same dichotomy. They dazzle from afar. Up close, they reveal the truth of the Tudor world. Magnificent, yes, but also musky, and more than a little musty. The mythology of Elizabeth's wardrobe persists long after her death. Her gowns are passed down, repurposed, sometimes buried with their new owners. Few survive, and those that do are rarely intact. But the idea of her fashion, immaculate, iconic, lives on in film, art and imagination. Today, costume historians marvel at the handiwork. Fashion designers study the silhouettes, but what they cannot replicate is the scent, that heavy human mix of perfume and persistence, that lingering aroma of a queen who would rather be covered in lead and lace than ever be seen as less than perfect. Because for Elizabeth, clothing isn't just fabric, it's armour. And though that armour is never washed, it never fails to protect. She glides through the corridors of Whitehall like a moving cloud of blossoms and spice. Her scent arrives before she does, a mingling of rose, orange blossom, musk and something richer, darker, lingering like a whisper behind a curtain. It's no accident. Elizabeth doesn't merely wear perfume, she weaponizes it. In a court where few things are truly clean, scent becomes a kind of code, a language, a barrier between the elite and the earthy, and in the case of the Queen, it becomes a signature, her own brand. One might not glimpse her every day, but they will know when she's passed by. The air itself changes. Perfume, in Tudor England, is far more than a cosmetic flourish. It is a necessity. The world around Elizabeth is pungent. Her palaces, for all their splendour, lack the ventilation and plumbing we take for granted. Rooms are heated with fires that leave behind layers of soot. Bodies crowd together, unwashed but heavily dressed. Food is cooked in great hearths, and animals roam nearby. The Thames, choked with waste, is never far from her windows. Every smell lingers, so the nobility respond not by cleaning it, but by masking it. Enter the age of scent. Elizabeth's perfumers are part artist, part alchemist. They blend imported ingredients, ambergris from Wales, musk from civet cats, sandalwood from the east, and delicate rose oil distilled by hand in copper stills. The process is painstaking. Oils must be balanced, alcohol measured, resin softened, but the result is nothing short of magical. She owns dozens of perfumes, each suited to a different purpose. There's a light floral for daytime court appearances, a heavier musky blend for evening audiences, and something distinctly medicinal smelling for times of illness. Some are stored in crystal flasks, others in pomanders, small ornate orbs filled with scented wax or herbs that dangle from belts or chains. These serve not only as perfume but also as protection. Tudor medicine held fast to the belief that bad air spread disease. A nose filled with civet and myrrh was thought to be a safer one, and Elizabeth surrounds herself with scent on every level. Her gloves are soaked in scented oils before wearing, her handkerchiefs are perfumed, and her rooms are lined with bowls of dried petals, resins, and sweet-smelling wood chips. It's said she favoured orange blossom and jasmine above all, but also dabbled in stronger notes, cinnamon, clove, even vinegar infused with lavender for days when the court's collective aroma turned unbearable. Perfume becomes a form of court etiquette, a silent contest. Ladies and lords lay scent upon scent, hoping to be noticed, not for reeking but for radiating. The olfactory arms race leads to some unfortunate accidents. Over-perfumed courtiers fainting in crowded halls, handkerchiefs so heavily soaked they stain silks, gloves that make hands sticky for hours. Still, Elizabeth reigns supreme. She never undersprays, but perfume, of course, has its limits. It can't cleanse. It can't truly remove odour. It only adds to the mix. And so the Queen, like many of her nobles, becomes a walking blend of powders, oils, sweat, and scent. A complex human incense stick. Some days she smells like roses, other days like rosewater trying to smother the ghost of last week's chicken stew. This reliance on scent creates its own rituals. Before events, Elizabeth is carefully prepared by her ladies. Her skin is dusted with fragrant powders. Her gowns are brushed with sachets of herbs tucked inside. Her hair, or rather her wig, is refreshed with pomade or perfumed powder. Even her bedding is treated with dried lavender and orris root. The very air around her is curated. Some accounts from visiting diplomats hint at the overpowering nature of this scented aura. One Venetian ambassador, sensitive to strong smells, reported feeling overcome by the sweetness of the English court. Whether that was a compliment or a cry for help remains unclear. It's worth pausing on one ingredient in particular, ambergris. Found in the intestines of sperm whales and aged over time, it has a sweet marine-like aroma that serves as a fixative in perfume. It's absurdly expensive and highly prized. Elizabeth naturally adores it. One of her most treasured perfumes reportedly uses ambergris as its base. A single bottle would have cost more than a commoner's yearly wages. Another favourite is civet, extracted, let's just say, delicately, from the glands of civet cats. The process is, well, intimate, but the scent it produces is musky, earthy and long-lasting. It's used sparingly to ground the more floral notes in her fragrances. Today, we might cringe at the source. Back then it was the height of sophistication. Fringe reports even suggest that Elizabeth had a scented wardrobe, gowns and cloaks sewn with sachets of perfume that released fragrance as she moved. These secret scented seams ensured that her mythos followed her, wafted, really wherever she went. The symbolism of perfume is not lost on the Queen. In a time when physical cleanliness is suspect and often avoided, smelling good becomes a stand-in for virtue. Purity, nobility. Elizabeth embraces this fully. Her scent is not just about hiding decay, it's about projecting power. No one ever remembers if the Virgin Queen had a blemish, but they remember the way her gloves smelled. And yet, as with all things Elizabethan, there's a darker undercurrent. Some of the ingredients used in her perfumes, like lead acetate, benzoin resin, or camphor, cause skin irritation, respiratory issues, even hallucinations in large doses. But that's the cost of court life. To be beautiful, to be clean in a world where actual cleanliness is elusive, requires risk. There's a grim anecdote, half legend, half plausible, of one court lady whose perfume was so heavily laced with mercury that she lost her sense of smell entirely. Another supposedly fainted after a day of wearing gloves soaked in spirit-based fragrance during a summer ball. These stories, while likely exaggerated, speak to the sheer potency of the Queen's scent economy. Scholars still debate how much of Elizabeth's perfume use was personal preference, and how much was political strategy. Some argue she genuinely loved the scents, collecting them like treasures. Others suggest it was all calculated, a means to maintain her divine illusion amid an increasingly decaying court. One thing is certain, no one else in the palace smelled quite like her, and that perhaps was the point. In the grand halls of Whitehall, beneath vaulted ceilings and amid glittering chandeliers, one's seldom discussed reality lurks behind all that Renaissance splendour. Even queens need to relieve themselves. And while Elizabethan's personal hygiene rituals are well-guarded secrets, the more basic human functions, those carried out with awkward urgency behind closed doors, paint an unfiltered picture of daily life in the Tudor court. It is a portrait that smells distinctly less of roses and much more of ammonia, damp linen and occasionally something stronger. Let's start with the throne behind the throne, the close stool. Elizabeth, like all high-born individuals of her era, uses a close stool for her bodily needs. It is, in essence, a padded wooden chair with a chamber pot nestled beneath a hinged seat. For the Queen, this apparatus is no mere furniture. Her close stool is an object of craftsmanship, lined with velvet or embroidered silk, cushioned for comfort, and sometimes even perfumed. It's a mobile piece of the royal household, carried discreetly by her personal attendants wherever she goes, in case nature calls during court progresses or long hours in council. The lady-in-waiting assigned to manage this rather intimate aspect of the Queen's life holds a special position, the groom of the stool. Despite the seemingly humiliating title, the role is one of immense trust. The groom handles not just physical clean-up, but also the maintenance of privacy, schedule, and subtle communication. Being this close to the Queen, physically and politically, means hearing things no one else does, sometimes during the most undignified moments. More than once, Groom of the Stool evolves into advisor, confidant and gatekeeper. In Elizabeth's case, several of her most trusted chamber ladies took turns in this duty, always with the utmost discretion. Now, while her stool is elegant and well attended, it's still at its core a container for waste, which then must go somewhere. Enter the unfortunate souls responsible for emptying it. Chamber pots, including those of the Queen, are often dumped into cesspits, privy vaults, or, if you're particularly bold, out the window. In fact, the phrase "gardez-lou," a corrupted cry of "regardez-lo," was once the only warning pedestrians received before a bucket of human waste was flung into the street. Elizabeth's court naturally had more refined systems, sort of. Whitehall and the other royal residences feature a network of guardrobes, narrow vertical shafts running down the sides of towers or behind walls, where waste can be deposited via bench-like seats. The idea is simple. You sit, you do your business, and gravity takes care of the rest. Some of these shafts open into rivers, others into cesspits or dry moats, creating a heady aroma that never quite fades. Servants are assigned to clean them, usually boys or older men past their prime, paid poorly and thanked rarely. It's said that Elizabeth preferred her own stool over these communal guardrobes, perhaps because of the odour, perhaps due to privacy. Still, even royal chambers weren't immune. Her palaces reeked in summer months, as hot weather awakened every stagnant scent hiding in the tapestries and behind the walls. To mask this, the court turned to the usual tricks: dried herbs, perfumed coals, and the liberal use of incense. Sometimes, fresh rushes were thrown down not just on floors but around guardrobe areas to absorb moisture and stench. Of course, even with all this effort, the smell persisted. Visitors often commented on it. One courtier, trying to be polite, described the royal halls as rich with the breath of so many gathered souls. That's poetic code for it stinks, and yet this was normal. Toilets, as we know them, did not exist. Running water was rare, and indoor plumbing virtually non-existent. Elizabeth's chambers might include wash basins filled with scented water, but those were for rinsing hands and faces, not for flushing waste. This brings us to hand washing, or rather, the frequent absence of it. While Elizabeth herself maintained fairly regular hand-washing rituals, usually with rosewater or vinegar-scented cloths, most of her court did not. Between banquets, dances, and hand-kissing ceremonies, hands passed germs like party favours. But in the 16th century, the concept of germ theory hadn't yet arrived. Illness was still blamed on bad airs or an imbalance of humours. Few people connected poor hygiene with poor health, so the Queen dines with unwashed hands. Her guests dip their fingers into shared dishes. Servants handle both food and chamber pots. A maid might adjust the Queen's ruff and then return to trimming meat, and no one bats an eye. Elizabeth attempts to keep her immediate surroundings a notch above the standard. Her towels are changed regularly, her napkins perfumed. She carries scented gloves, not just for show, but also as subtle shields against the omnipresent miasmas. Yet for all her effort, the fact remains: the very environment she rules is saturated in bodily byproducts. And it's not just human waste. Animal waste is part of the picture too. Palace grounds teem with horses, dogs and falcons. Courtiers bring lapdogs to banquets. Cats wander the kitchens. Horses are stabled just outside royal apartments. Waste piles up in stables, along garden paths, even near kitchens. The smell mingles with human odours to form a sensory experience that would make a modern-day visitor reel. Still, Elizabeth adapts. She maintains control of her image with startling precision. When nature calls during a day of ceremonies, she retreats discreetly. When an ambassador visits, her chamber is freshly aired, her close stool hidden behind a curtain. Her scent, layered as ever, fills the void left by what reality fails to disguise. But privacy is never absolute. Rumours circulate, as they always do. Whispers that the Queen suffers from digestive troubles, that her breath and body exude an odour no perfume can mask, that her ladies must frequently freshen her seat with new linens. Some fringe tales suggest she used herbal infusions to clean herself after each use of the stool: marjoram, lavender, mint, steeped in warm water and applied with cloth. Others say she simply bore it all with regal fortitude, as she did everything else. one hand on her sceptre, the other discreetly reaching for rosewater. There's even debate among historians as to how Elizabeth approached her own toilet habits as she aged. Infirmity, particularly in her last years, likely made it difficult to move easily. Her attendants, fiercely loyal and tightly controlled, would have managed these private tasks with gentle efficiency. But the Queen's retreat from public life, her refusal to be seen eating, sleeping, or even relaxing, suggests a growing fear of appearing mortal. To see her seated on a gilded stool, no matter how elegant, might have shattered the illusion. And so, even her most natural functions become shrouded in ritual and mystery. But make no mistake, behind the throne room there is always a chamber. Behind every ruff and gown, a very human queen. And behind the scent of civet and rose, there is always something earthier waiting beneath. The Whitehall Palace shimmers with gold leaf and Tudor roses, its riverside sprawl a symbol of power and majesty. But step away from the tapestries, the banqueting halls, the perfumed courtiers whispering under frilled collars, and descend instead into its bowels. Because what lies beneath this royal splendour isn't fit for poetry or pageantry. It is, in the most literal sense, a festering problem, and one Elizabeth tries to ignore as best she can. The palace plumbing, or what passed for it in the 16th century, was less system and more wishful thinking. Beneath its impressive ceilings and panelled walls, Whitehall suffered from a sewage crisis that no amount of rosewater could truly mask. For all her power, Elizabeth reigned over a court built atop an increasingly unreliable network of cesspits, drains, and clogged tunnels. It was not, as one might say, her crowning achievement. Guardrobes, those vertical shafts doubling as toilets, were common in the palace, but many emptied into underground vaults or moats that were rarely cleaned. Over time they became choked with waste. Summer heat only worsened the situation, baking the excrement into the air, filling royal chambers with a pungent haze. The smell was so persistent it seeped into tapestries and upholstery. Imagine dining while the scent of 5-year-old cesspit stew wafts through your ruff. Even the Thames just outside the palace walls could offer no relief. It functioned as both sewer and source. Human waste, kitchen refuse, animal remains, all found their way into its slow-moving waters, and yet water for washing, for cooking, and sometimes even for drinking was still drawn from it. The contradiction wasn't lost on contemporaries, but without modern filtration, it was simply how things were. At Whitehall, various attempts were made to manage the smell. Certain garderobes were built with chutes leading into the river, others emptied into pits that were supposed to be cleared regularly. But regularly in Tudor England was a loose term. Clearing cesspits was dangerous, time-consuming, and incredibly unpleasant. The work often fell to the lowest-ranked labourers, many of whom suffered respiratory issues from the fumes or succumbed to infections and accidents, such as falling into the very pits they were cleaning, and the system was far from foolproof. One particularly grim incident in 1591 involved the collapse of a wooden floor beneath a communal privy at the Blackfriars Theatre, not far from Elizabeth's London. Dozens of people plunged into the waste below. Thankfully, Elizabeth wasn't present, but it was a chilling reminder that behind the grandeur of the age the infrastructure was rotting. Within her private apartments, Elizabeth attempted to distance herself from these olfactory offences. Her chambers were kept meticulously tidy. Sweet-smelling herbs lined the windowsills, fresh rushes were laid on the floors, and bowls of vinegar-infused water were placed near doors to catch bad airs. Pomanders dangled from her belt. Yet even these couldn't erase the unmistakable presence of poor drainage. Some fringe accounts suggest Elizabeth ordered her garderobe shaft sealed during hot months, relying solely on her perfumed close stool to control the air quality. Others speculate she moved sleeping quarters seasonally, not for comfort, but to escape a particularly aromatic corner of the palace. Her refusal to sleep in certain rooms, her tendency to close doors and draw heavy curtains, may have been more than royal quirks. They might have been desperate strategies for containing the stench. Interestingly, Elizabeth showed little interest in major structural improvements. Proposals for deeper sewers or expanded drainage systems were expensive and disruptive, and while she spared no expense on portraits or pageants, she was famously frugal about unglamorous expenditures. If something couldn't be turned into spectacle, she rarely funded it, and sewage, tragically, lacked spectacle. Yet her engineers tried. Sir John Harrington, her godson and courtier, famously invented a flushing toilet, complete with a water cistern and a valve system. He called it the Ajax, a cheeky nod to the ancient Greek warrior and the slang term jakes, meaning toilet. He even installed a working version at his own home. Delighted by the idea, he presented the concept to Elizabeth herself in 1596, complete with a lengthy treatise on sanitation. The Queen reportedly found it amusing and had one installed at Richmond Palace, but she never really used it. Whether out of habit, scepticism, or fear of strange noises, Elizabeth remained loyal to her close stool. The Ajax was novel, but not fashionable, and as with many Tudor inventions, it was simply ahead of its time. Indoor flushing toilets wouldn't become common for another 2 centuries. Harrington's invention faded into obscurity, though modern historians now cite it as a pioneering step towards sanitation reform. Meanwhile, the problem at Whitehall worsened. In the late 1590s, a series of unusually hot summers pushed the palace's limits. Reports from visitors noted the thick air in the Privy Gardens and a stench rising from below the south wall. Repairs were ordered, vents were added, but the court, ever crowded with nobles, musicians, servants and animals, continued to push the system to its limit. The result was a palace that gleamed above but oozed below. Even Elizabeth's famously elaborate rituals, her morning dressing, her evening prayers, her endless council meetings, had to contend with the inescapable fact that the palace's drainage was failing. She might walk through the great gallery in a gown worth thousands, only to pass a spot on the floor faintly stained by seepage from the kitchens or privy vaults beneath. Her reaction? Stoicism mostly. If she noticed, she did not comment. If she was disgusted, she hid it. Only through her constant reliance on perfume and her increasingly private habits do we see hints that the Queen was not immune to her environment. And when the stench grew too strong, she did what many monarchs before her had done. She moved. Elizabeth's court was famously peripatetic. Progresses, seasonal royal tours, weren't just political theatre. They were also a practical escape from the build-up of filth. The Queen's annual progresses allowed her to visit country homes, manors, and smaller palaces where the air was fresher and the cesspits less abused. Her hosts bore the expense and strain of her visits, but they also granted her relief from the festering heart of London. Still, she always returned, because Whitehall, for all its putrid plumbing, remained the centre of her power. After her death, the palace continued to struggle with sanitation. By the late 1600s, it had become so degraded that when fire consumed much of it in 1698, few wept for its loss. The grand chambers were gone, the tapestries ash, but so were the smells, the waste, and the festering corridors of Tudor plumbing. Today, only fragments of Whitehall remain. Tourists walk the stone paths unaware of the layers of rot and refuse that once lay beneath. But for Elizabeth, that was daily life. A queen above, a cesspit below, and in between, a kingdom held together with rosewater, lace, and a great deal of patience. The air in Elizabeth's private chambers is thick with the scent of rosemary and warming oils, the candles burning low as the evening sets in. She reclines in her chair, eyes half closed, as her physician carefully unwraps a bundle of linen. Inside, leeches, dried herbs, iron instruments, and something that looks suspiciously like a roasted pigeon. Welcome to the medical side of the Virgin Queen's beauty regimen, a blend of science, superstition, and just a dash of medieval horror. Medicine in Elizabethan England straddles an uneasy line between ancient theory and emerging experimentation. It is a world still clinging to the four humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Good health, the physicians believe, comes from balance among these elements. Imbalance leads to illness. And to restore that balance, bleeding, purging, sweating, and, in more cases than one would like to imagine, vomiting. Elizabeth I, despite her keen intellect and love of scholarly pursuits, does not escape the grip of this grim tradition. Her medical treatments often blur the line between cosmetic care and attempted cures, and because she must always appear healthy, radiant even, her personal grooming is inseparable from her healthcare. Take her skincare, for example. Beyond the toxic lead-based serous already slathered onto her face, her physicians prescribe herbal poultices to soothe breakouts, treat sores, or reduce inflammation caused by makeup. These might include honey mixed with goose fat, crushed marigold petals, or slices of raw cucumber soaked in vinegar. Not the worst ideas, considering the alternatives, but in more desperate moments, mercury-based ointments are applied. Mercury! A substance now labelled a neurotoxin, then used as casually as face cream. And the pigeon? That's no dinner. In certain recipes, the flesh of a freshly killed pigeon, split open and warm, is applied directly to the queen's feet or stomach to draw out illness. A living poultice, essentially. Fringe tales claim she endured this treatment during episodes of fever or stomach pain, though some modern historians question the reliability of these reports. Still, it fits the medical logic of the time. Illness is a physical presence, a malady to be lured from the body by whatever means necessary. Leeches unsurprisingly have a standing invitation to court. Used primarily for bleeding, they're believed to rebalance the humours by drawing excess blood. Elizabeth likely underwent such treatments for headaches, swelling, or general malaise. The procedure is relatively simple. A leech is placed on the skin, often behind the ear or on the forearm. It bites, secretes a mild anaesthetic and begins to feed. When it's had its fill, or when the physician decides the dose is sufficient, it's removed and the bite is dressed with vinegar and linen. It's worth noting that Elizabeth did not subject herself to these rituals willingly or often. She hated being seen as ill. To be perceived as weak was dangerous, both politically and symbolically. But when symptoms became undeniable, swelling, pain, sleeplessness, she endured what had to be done, albeit in private, with only her closest women and physicians present. One fringe anecdote tells of a particularly fierce toothache that left her near tears. Unable to eat or sleep, she finally allowed her physician to prepare a poultice of ground cloves, laudanum, an opiate, and crushed oyster shell to numb the pain. This was applied to the cheek and packed inside her mouth, resulting in temporary relief, but also visible swelling and a slight lisp. For a week she refused to speak at court and cancelled several public appearances. These episodes were rare but not unknown. Her health, especially as she aged, became a carefully guarded secret. To show pain was to show mortality, and Elizabeth had long since fashioned herself into something more enduring. Other medical practices ventured into the downright bizarre. Astrological charts were often consulted before treatments. Physicians would not bleed a patient under the wrong star alignment, and certain herbs were believed to be more potent during specific moon phases. Elizabeth's doctors, though educated in classical texts, still scribbled in the margins about planetary influences and spiritual temperaments. Cupping, another popular technique, involved placing heated glass or horn cups on the skin to create suction. This was thought to draw out bad blood or vapours. Elizabeth may have undergone this for muscle pain or fatigue, though no direct records confirm it. Still, given the popularity of the practice among European royals, it's not a stretch. And then there's the matter of plasters and poultices. These sticky applications, often made with animal fats, beeswax and herbs, were used to draw out toxins from the skin. Applied to the chest during coughs, or the limbs during swelling, they smelled strong and stuck like glue. One particularly potent recipe involved mustard seed, goose grease, and minced onion, a combination said to cure colds and repel suitors in equal measure. For internal issues, Elizabeth drank tonics that would make modern pharmacists weep. These concoctions contained everything from powdered coral and crushed pearls to dried toad and hartshorn, deer antler. She believed in the power of nature, but also in the power of reputation. A physician who dared offer something unsophisticated or common might find himself dismissed. So her remedies grew increasingly exotic and increasingly dangerous. But the Queen wasn't without agency. She was known to question her doctors, demand explanations, and reject treatments she deemed unproven or undignified. She loathed the idea of being seen vulnerable or bedridden. So she negotiated, tailored her regimens to suit her pride. This balancing act between appearance and treatment is evident in how she managed her aging body. Elizabeth was deeply reluctant to show signs of decline. As her eyesight dimmed, she hid her spectacles. As her hands stiffened, she avoided writing in public. Her arthritis, if she had it, as some suggest, went unacknowledged. When her appetite waned, her meals became rituals of presence, not consumption. And when she could no longer hide a malaise, she cloaked it in symbolism. One such moment came during a ceremonial appearance late in her reign. Pale and gaunt, she stood before the crowd, clad in a white gown stitched with pearls. Her skin glowed, thanks more to thick layers of ceruse than health. Her body swayed slightly and attendants moved closer, ready to catch her. But she smiled, spoke with strength, projected power, and the crowd cheered. Behind the scenes, her doctors likely fussed over her that evening, adjusted her tonics, checked her pulse, changed the pigeon. It's worth noting that medicine at court was as much theatre as science. Physicians knew their treatments had to be dramatic, symbolic, and often custom-fitted to the Queen's sense of self. A simple herbal tea wouldn't do. A distillation of moon-charged lily root might. Historians today argue about the efficacy of these rituals. Some suggest Elizabeth's survival into her 70s, a rare feat, means something must have worked. Others contend she lived in spite of her treatments, not because of them. The lead and mercury alone should have shortened her life, but the human body is resilient, especially when propped up by willpower, ritual, and the constant pressure of reigning over a kingdom on edge. In her final years, her physicians turned increasingly to comfort over cure. Warm compresses, gentle infusions, sleep draughts, yet she resisted. Even in failing health, Elizabeth refused to take to her bed. She stood. She sat in silence. She watched her world fade without ever surrendering to it. And perhaps in the end, her most potent medicine was her myth. The hands of a queen, like her crown, must never betray the truth of age or labour. For Elizabeth I, whose power rests not only on policy and speech, but on image and presence, even her fingertips must maintain the illusion. They glide across velvet, gesture commandingly during council, and extend to accept the kisses of foreign dignitaries. Yet beneath the rings and lace cuffs lies a different story, one of stubborn grime, ragged cuticles, and a manicuring routine that would make even the bravest modern spa-goer flinch. Let's get one thing clear. Elizabethan England does not specialise in hand hygiene. Soap is harsh, water is suspect, and nail care often comes down to scratching at dirt with improvised tools. For the Queen, this simply won't do. Her hands are extensions of her sovereignty. They hold sceptres and sign laws, accept tributes and dismiss traitors, and yet, like the rest of her body, they are exposed daily to the grime of an unwashed world. To combat this, Elizabeth employs a variety of methods, some surprisingly effective, others dangerously ambitious. It begins with the simplest tool, the nail scraper. Not a neat emery board or sanitised file, but a sharpened sliver of bone, ivory, or occasionally rat teeth, cleaned and reshaped for reuse. These instruments, often carved by hand or passed down from apothecaries, are designed to clear dirt from beneath the nails and even out ragged edges. Attendants use them with great care, often while the Queen listens to music or poetry, to distract her from the occasional sting of overzealous filing. Next comes the pumice stone. Volcanic and porous, it's used to smooth calluses, polish the tops of her fingers, and even refine the skin around the nails. But this process, while effective in theory, can lead to irritation and microscopic cuts, which is where the herbal balms come in, mixtures of beeswax, rose oil and almond milk massaged into her hands to soften the aftermath of exfoliation. Still, her skin is not always cooperative. Elizabeth's hands, by all accounts, are delicate but prone to dryness, possibly from the constant exposure to cosmetics and scented gloves, possibly from age. As she nears 50, her courtiers begin to notice how carefully she now drapes her sleeves to obscure her fingers, how often she clutches a fan or handkerchief, as if to create a gentle screen. In public she rarely gestures too widely, keeping her hands close to her body, her fingers curled inward. Some fringe accounts suggest she suffers from eczema or dermatitis, exacerbated by her cosmetics or even her famously perfumed gloves. These gloves, soaked in spirit-based fragrances and softened with animal fats, are as much fashion as function. They release scent when warmed by body heat, but they also trap moisture, sweat, and residue. Worn daily, often for hours, they leave behind a slick film on the hands, which can lead to itching, inflammation, and discoloration. And so she scrubs, but not with water. Instead, Elizabeth turns to vinegar rinses, a blend of white wine vinegar and dried lavender, rose petals, and marjoram. Her ladies warm the solution slightly and dip linen cloths into it, dabbing her palms, fingers, and nails. It smells divine. It stings slightly, but it reassures her. For nail colouring, she avoids the garish dyes favoured in other courts. While red-stained nails are fashionable in some regions, Elizabeth keeps hers bare or polished to a pale sheen using beeswax and finely ground alabaster. A light tint from crushed roses or elderberries is occasionally applied, but only for special occasions. She prefers natural-looking fingertips, so long as they're flawlessly natural. When infection strikes, a hangnail that swells, a scratch that oozes, she consults her physicians. They respond with poultices, mashed fig mixed with honey and camphor, or even ground plantain leaves bound with egg white. Fingers are wrapped in linen and left overnight. In serious cases, leeches might be summoned to draw out bad blood, a practice she accepts with visible distaste. One tale, often whispered among her household, tells of a single inflamed finger that threatened to derail a major diplomatic meeting. The swelling, believed to be from a splinter or insect bite, refused to subside. Her surgeon was summoned in the dead of night. He lanced it, cleaned it with brandy, and wrapped it in a cloth soaked in frankincense. The next morning Elizabeth appeared in court with a jewelled glove on one hand and nothing on the other, concealing the injury entirely. She greeted the ambassador with her gloved hand, smiled graciously, and not a single foreign eye caught the compromise. Because compromise, for Elizabeth, is always carefully calculated. Her nails may be brittle, her cuticles ragged, her palms occasionally chafed from holding heavy sceptres or ink-stained from late-night writing. But she compensates with adornment. Rings, stacked high on her fingers, glitter distractingly. Sleeves embroidered with silver thread dangle just low enough to obscure, and when in doubt she holds a sprig of rosemary or a pomander, letting scent and flourish carry the attention away. There's also the court ritual of hand presentation. Foreign guests are often permitted the honour of kissing the Queen's hand. This is more than formality. It's theatre. The kiss never lands on bare skin. Elizabeth extends her hand slowly, gloved or covered with a handkerchief, allowing the bowing subject to press lips to the edge of fabric or ring. The illusion of intimacy is maintained, even as actual contact is controlled. This keeps her mystique intact, and any possible dirt or germs at bay. In her youth, her hands were described as ivory and long-fingered. As she aged, those descriptions grew more cautious, graceful, light as paper, refined by time. It was code for thinner, paler, more veined. Yet she maintains the illusion to the end. Some fringe historians have suggested she wore false nails in later years, small slivers of horn or ivory glued with fish bladder adhesive. Others say her rings were designed to hide misshapen joints, the gold fashioned to taper over swollen knuckles or cover broken nails. Whether true or not, the speculation reveals the lengths people imagine she went to preserve her image. But even without trickery, Elizabeth's hands remained tools of state. She used them to sign declarations, touch the heads of knights, press rings into the palms of favourites. She gestured, posed, and blessed. And though they aged, though they bore the wear of decades of rule, she never let them betray her. Her daily rituals persisted into old age. Nail scraping, vinegar dabbing, the occasional bloodletting, and always the gloves, dozens of pairs, each stitched with care, each soaked in her signature scent. They were her shield, her signature, her statement, and perhaps, in their concealment, they told the truth more honestly than bare skin ever could. Because for Elizabeth, to be queen was to be immaculate, and if that meant polishing her nails with crushed pearl and masking infection with jasmine-scented balm, then so be it. The Tudor court is a mirror. Every glance cast in Elizabeth's direction reflects back 100-fold as nobles scramble to emulate her. Her fashion, her speech, her mannerisms, and yes, her hygiene. If the Virgin Queen wears ceruse, so do they. If she powders her wigs with lavender dust, they triple the dose. If she perfumes her gloves until they drip, they perfume their entire wardrobes. It's imitation not as flattery, but survival. Because in the glittering petri dish that is Elizabeth's court, to stink like a peasant is political suicide. This imitation breeds an entire ecosystem of noble hygiene, or more accurately, the illusion of it. The aristocracy does not bathe regularly, nor do they keep their bodies clean in any way that would satisfy modern sensibilities. But like Elizabeth, they mask the natural with the artificial. They layer scent upon scent. They change their linen shirts obsessively. They starch their ruffs until they stand like halos, drawing attention upward, away from whatever's happening beneath. And the result is astonishing. a court of hundreds, all swaddled in lace, velvet and odour. It is an olfactory arms race, and everyone is losing. Noble women, desperate to mirror the Queen's ghostly complexion, slather their faces in white lead just as she does. The results are mixed. Some achieve the desired moonlit glow. Others develop sores, redness, and permanent scarring. But to appear in court without makeup would be worse, a sign of rebellion or poverty. Better to be diseased than unfashionable. Noblemen follow suit. They powder their faces, scent their hair, and don starched collars that tickle their ears. They too adopt the Queen's fondness for scented gloves, sometimes to absurd extremes. One ambassador observed a young courtier dousing his gloves so heavily in musk oil that he rendered himself unfit to stand near flames. Even their speech reflects Elizabeth. They mimic her turns of phrase, her linguistic flourishes, her studied pauses. But language, like hygiene, is surface. Underneath, most are just trying to stay close enough to catch a whisper of royal favour. Their clothes tell another story. Like the Queen, they avoid washing their outer garments. Velvet doublets, brocade skirts, fur-lined cloaks, all maintained with brushing and perfuming, never soap and water. The inner layers, the linen shifts, the hose, the underskirts, are laundered frequently, but they can only do so much. By the end of a long day of dancing, drinking and court intrigue, every noble smells like a personal blend of their own body, the London air and the contents of a spice market. It's not just the scent that wafts through court, but also the sound of scratching. Lice are ubiquitous. Even the highest-ranking nobles accept them as a fact of life. They scratch discreetly, carry combs, and sometimes burn their hairpieces over candle flames to kill the more adventurous specimens. In certain corridors, the smell of singed hair becomes as recognisable as that of rosewater. And still, they smile, they bow, they curtsy, they compete, not for cleanliness, but for perceived cleanliness. The illusion must be maintained. If Elizabeth smells like a rose garden soaked in vinegar, then so must they. To support this, an entire class of servants rises up. The groomers of the noble world. Hairdressers, glove perfumers, linen washers, pomander makers, starchers. Some court members even employ personal scenters, servants dedicated entirely to maintaining their master's or mistress's olfactory presence. These scenters refill pomanders, soak gloves, press herbs into sleeves, and wipe down ruffs with vinegar and crushed rosemary. It's a full-time job, and a risky one. An error in mixture or scent strength can result in public embarrassment, or worse, royal disapproval. There's even documented court gossip centred around smell. Who forgot to change their linen? Whose chamber pot was dumped too close to the courtyard? Who fainted from too much civet oil? These whispered critiques form their own kind of power structure. A well-scented noble is a welcome one. A reeking one might find themselves seated near the doors at the next banquet. This obsession extends to food and drink. The court's diet, rich in meats, sugar and spices, exacerbates the scent situation. Body odours are influenced by what one consumes, and at Elizabeth's table, roast beef, pickled fish and spiced wine are common fare. The result is an aromatic courtier, even before perfume. To offset this, nobles chew on aniseed, cloves or angelica root, natural breath fresheners meant to disguise the byproducts of banquets. Some carry mouth sweets, early versions of breath mints, made from compressed herbs and sugar. They press these against the tongue before audience with the Queen or during public speeches. One fringe anecdote tells of a nobleman who, in a fit of drunken affection, leaned in too close to Elizabeth at a masque and was never invited back. The unspoken reason? His breath, said to smell of spoiled eel and beer, lingered long after he staggered out. Whether the tale is true or courtly myth, it underscores a key point. Scent is politics. Even the Queen's favoured nobles are not immune. Robert Dudley, her longtime companion, is known for his impeccable grooming. He changes his linen multiple times a day, wears gloves scented with civet, and commissions custom-made pomanders shaped like tiny castles. His grooming becomes part of his mystique. When he enters a room, people know, by smell, that he's arrived. Court life, then, becomes a kind of theatrical performance in which everyone wears a mask of scent. But as with all performances, the mask occasionally slips. In the heat of summer, the court becomes unbearable. The Thames, teeming with refuse, releases its worst aromas. The palace rushes rot. Insects breed in standing water. Perfumes mix and mingle into a thick fog that clings to every surface. People faint. Doors are left open for airflow. Courtiers retreat to the gardens, fanning themselves with silk fans dipped in mint oil. But they cannot escape. Elizabeth herself adjusts. She orders extra sachets placed under her skirts. Her sleeves are lined with fresh lavender. Her windows are propped open at odd angles to catch the rare breeze. She retires early on the hottest days, the strain of smelling perfection clearly taking its toll. Some historians argue this collective obsession with masking odour actually delayed public health reforms. When scent could substitute for sanitation, there was little incentive to build better plumbing or mandate public cleanliness. Others point out that the perfume trade boomed under Elizabeth, with England importing vast quantities of oils, resins and flowers for the sole purpose of not smelling like itself. Regardless of the cause, the court that reeked together stayed together, and in this world of strategic stench, Elizabeth stood at the centre, glowing, powdered, perfumed. Her courtiers orbited her like scented satellites, each hoping to catch her favour with the perfect balance of civet and charm. It's easy to romanticize this era from a distance. The gowns, the feasts, the poetry, but up close the illusion wavers. Behind every jewelled ruff is a patch of itchy skin, behind every glove a sweating palm, and behind every noble smile a mouthful of spices meant to ward off the taste of reality. Still, they persevere, because in Elizabeth's court you can never be too rich, too powdered, or too perfumed. And to smell anything less than royal, that, dear listener, is the real disgrace. Disease seeps through Tudor England like fog through the marshes, constant, lingering, and rarely questioned. In the streets of London, sickness is part of the architecture. In the countryside, it's woven into the seasons. And at court, where nobles gather in silken splendour beneath gilded ceilings, it clings quietly behind every curtain. Elizabethan's palace may shine with gold, but beneath that shine lies a world unacquainted with basic hygiene, and utterly vulnerable to illness. Public health, in Elizabethan terms, is a contradiction. It is quite simply not public, nor particularly healthy. The concept of sanitation exists, but mostly as instinct or superstition. People know that stench is bad. They know that filth breeds misfortune, but they don't understand why. Germ theory is still centuries away. Microscopic life is a mystery. Illness is thought to come from miasmas, bad airs, rising from swamps, dung heaps, and unclean bodies. And in this swirling cloud of misunderstanding, disease thrives. Elizabeth's court, for all its rituals and refinements, is no exception. Despite the perfumed gloves, the scented pomanders, the elaborate gowns, the daily brushing of gowns instead of washing, everyone is a potential carrier. And everything, from feathered fans to lace ruffs, becomes a breeding ground for bacteria and vermin. The Queen herself is surrounded by servants whose hands touch chamber pots, food trays, writing materials, and her person in a single afternoon. Hand-washing, as we now understand it, is not part of the routine. Instead, fingers are dipped in bowls of rosewater before meals, less to disinfect, more to show status. The bowl is shared, so are the germs, and the diseases. They're the usual suspects: plague, typhus, dysentery, smallpox, and the sweating sickness, a terrifying Tudor phenomenon that strikes fast and kills within hours. Elizabeth survives smallpox as a young woman, but carries the pitted scars for life, a rare instance when illness leaves a visible mark on the Queen. Her court, however, is not so fortunate. Plague outbreaks are common. When they hit London, the Queen flees. The court scatters to safer country estates, carrying the disease with them unknowingly. Whitehall, Richmond, Greenwich. Palaces are scrubbed with vinegar, rooms aired out, walls painted with lime. Priests are summoned, doors are nailed shut. But none of this stops the spread. And still, life continues. Banquets are held, masques are performed, ambassadors arrive, the sick are hidden, sent away, or quietly removed from court. There are no hospitals in the way we think of them. Instead, those too poor to afford care are tended by family or left to die in pest houses on the outskirts of towns. The Queen's medical team, led by her physician in ordinary and supported by herbalists and astrologers, tries to stay ahead of the sickness. They inspect the royal residences for foul smells, They prescribe tonics made from vinegar and garlic. They suggest hanging wormwood over doorways or burning dried sage in hallways. And when all else fails, they bleed the afflicted. But no amount of bleeding can cure the reality of close quarters. Elizabeth's court is a pressure cooker. Courtiers jostle for favour, whisper secrets, dance, dine, argue, embrace. Germs pass from hand to glove to goblet to lip. Illness becomes political. If one noble falls ill, another might rise. If a favourite coughs at the wrong moment, he may be quietly sent to the country to recover, never to return. Yet, amid all this, the Queen insists on appearances. Her chambers are kept meticulously arranged, her air scented, her visitors screened. She may be surrounded by plague, but she will not look afraid. One account from the late 1580s details her command to continue court festivities, despite rising death tolls in London. Masks are worn, not the hygienic kind, but elaborate theatrical ones, decorated with pearls and feathers. They cover faces but do nothing to prevent the spread of disease. Still, the court dances. The illusion endures. And what of the common people? Their reality is bleaker still. In the streets, open sewage runs beside homes. Animals are slaughtered in alleyways. Food is sold beside dung heaps. Water drawn from public wells or the river carries contaminants from every nearby privy. Children play in the same streets where chamber pots are emptied. There is no organised waste disposal, no sewage system, no sanitation workers. When illness strikes, families burn rosemary or carry posies in their sleeves. Ring-a-ring-a roses isn't just a nursery rhyme, it's a plague song, a reflection of a world where sickness is so constant, so expected, that even children sing about it. And yet, amidst this, Elizabeth builds a myth of purity. She never marries, never bears children, never ages, at least not in the eyes of her people. Her body, untouched by scandal, untouched by disease, becomes symbolic. She is not of the people. She is above them, divine, incorruptible. But of course, she is human. She falls ill, she bleeds, she scars, she fears. During particularly deadly outbreaks, she retreats for weeks. Progresses are delayed. Courtiers are barred from audience. Her food is prepared in isolation. Visitors must change clothes, wash hands, and air their garments before being allowed near her. And still, some slip through the cracks. Some fringe scholars argue that Elizabeth's obsession with perfumes and cleanliness, her frequent use of rosewater, her habit of dabbing scented oils on door frames, her insistence on lavender-stuffed mattresses, was not just vanity, but a desperate effort to control the uncontrollable. That behind the lead makeup and white gloves was a woman terrified of contagion, doing everything in her power to appear untouched. There are records of nobles dying within days of leaving her court, of entire households succumbing to fever weeks after hosting her. But the Queen remains insulated, somehow always one step ahead. Perhaps it's luck. Perhaps it's her insistence on distance, her avoidance of public dining, her preference for linen underlayers that are washed daily. Or perhaps it's simply the force of her will. Because to admit illness would be to admit weakness, and in a world where queens are supposed to rule by divine right, there is no room for weakness. Historians still debate whether Elizabeth's hygiene was better or worse than her subjects. Some claim she was unusually clean for her time, changing her linen daily, rinsing with scented water, refusing to wear visibly dirty clothes. Others argue it was all a facade, that her body, like her court, was layered with scent and powder, but hiding the same decay as everyone else. But one truth is clear: public health, as we know it, did not exist. There were no sewage treatment plants, no hand sanitizer, no understanding of bacteria, only rituals, guesses, and prayers. And somehow she survived. Not because her court was clean, but because her image was untouchable, and sometimes, in Tudor England, that was the best medicine of all. The flicker of candlelight dances across parchment, illuminating the careful curve of the Queen's handwriting. A love letter, delicate, formal, and laced with subtle power, awaits delivery. The wax seal is crimson, pressed with the royal crest, but what no one discusses is what lingers within the folds of the parchment. The faint scent of civet and rose, yes, but also the breath of the woman who penned it. Elizabeth I, monarch of myth, mistress of image, is a woman of passionate correspondence and, according to many accounts, ferociously bad breath. Romance in Elizabeth's court is both performance and peril. The Queen, famously unmarried, cultivates an air of unattainability. She flirts with foreign kings, dances with dukes, and delivers cutting quips to suitors bold enough to try their luck. But behind the public display, behind the allegorical masks and coy verses, lies a very human body, one shaped by the harsh realities of Tudor hygiene. Her dental decay, already well underway by her middle years, affects more than just her smile. It alters her breath. The rot of her teeth combined with a diet rich in sugar and the rare brushing of enamel creates an aroma that no rosewater rinse can fully mask. And yet, Elizabeth continues to court affection, by letter, by gaze, by reputation. Her love letters are legendary. She writes with precision and flair, her words chosen as much for their political weight as their romantic effect. To Robert Dudley, her longtime favourite, she pens notes that blend affection and command. To the Duke of Anjou, she balances flirtation with diplomacy. Each letter is signed, "Your most faithful," "Your loving sovereign," or, in moments of theatricality, "Your Majesty, who is not without passion." But behind each folded page is the truth. These letters serve where her presence sometimes cannot. Elizabeth's face is painted, her body perfumed, her person carefully protected by layers of ritual. But her words? They travel unadorned, carrying the emotional heat she dares not express aloud. At court, romance is not whispered sweetly in moonlit corridors. It is exchanged through verse, glances, and the carefully orchestrated brush of hands during dance. And yet, even in these moments, the limitations of hygiene loom. Take, for instance, the act of kissing hands, a courtly ritual repeated dozens of times a day. The Queen offers her gloved hand. A nobleman bows and presses lips to it, careful not to actually touch skin. It's a pageant, an illusion of closeness. But on rare occasions, bold favourites, like Dudley, are granted the honour of her ungloved hand, to feel the warmth of her skin, to perhaps sense the faint scent of rose oil on her fingertips. And what of the kiss itself? Contrary to popular modern imagery, full-on kissing is rare in Elizabeth's court. The mouth is a dangerous, intimate space. Halitosis is rampant. Dental rot is common. Most people chew herbs or carry clove-stuffed sachets just to hold conversation. A courtier leaning in too close might find themselves assaulted by the ghost of last night's venison. One Spanish ambassador famously remarked, "The breath of the English is like their weather, unpredictable and damp." He meant it diplomatically, barely. Elizabeth, ever conscious of appearances, takes precautions. Her breath, often masked with rose lozenges or clove chews, is managed with as much attention as her wigs or gowns. She's known to keep dried herbs in her pockets, pressing them to her lips before speaking to close company. She rinses with vinegar and honey. She carries perfumed handkerchiefs, but the rot cannot be truly hidden. And still, her lovers remain, because her allure lies not in physical perfection, but in something more intoxicating: control. Elizabeth makes men feel chosen. She praises their wit. She rewards their loyalty. She flirts with her eyes, her words, her intellect. The body for her is secondary. Yet, there are rumours. Whispers of moments stolen behind chamber doors, of hands lingering too long, of midnight meetings under pretence of counsel. Elizabeth denies them all. Her virginity becomes a pillar of her political identity. She's married to England, she declares. She needs no man. But Robert Dudley's presence at her side for decades says otherwise. Their relationship, steeped in affection and scandal, defies simple explanation. They write constantly. They dance together late into the night. They spend long hours in private conversation. Whether physical or not, their intimacy is undeniable. Still, Elizabeth remains above suspicion. Just. Her other courtiers, hopeful or hopeless in their affection, play along. They compose odes. They send jewelled tokens. One famously offers a locket containing a miniature of the Queen, surrounded by sapphires and garnets. Another pens a sonnet comparing her to Diana, the chaste huntress. Elizabeth receives these gifts with practised grace, sometimes rewarding the bold with favour, sometimes freezing them out entirely, and yet she never fully commits. Every suitor, foreign or domestic, is kept at arm's length. They're useful as tools of diplomacy. France sends a duke, Sweden offers a prince, even Russia makes a bid, but none are accepted. Elizabeth flirts, but she never says yes. Why? Some say she fears childbirth. having witnessed her stepmother Jane Seymour die from complications. Others claim she distrusts men, scarred by her father's marriages and her own near scandal with Thomas Seymour in youth. Still others suggest she simply enjoys the power of being unattached, the freedom to command without compromise, and perhaps her personal discomforts play a role. Her body, for all its royal symbolism, is a source of inconvenience. Her teeth ache. Her skin itches beneath layers of ceruse. Her breath cannot always be sweet. Her gowns weigh her down. Is it any wonder she prefers the thrill of letters over the mess of touch? In her later years, Elizabeth becomes more private. She dines alone more often. She speaks less. Her letters grow shorter, more formal. Some say her heart remains loyal to Dudley until his death. Others believe she grieves not for a man, but for the youth and freedom he represented. But her legend continues. Poets immortalise her as fair, eternal, untouchable. Painters erase her age. Ambassadors continue to address her as a goddess queen, even as they notice the powder thickening on her face. Behind the myth, though, is a woman who navigates affection like she navigates everything else, carefully, strategically, with just enough vulnerability to be believable and just enough distance to stay safe. Her breath may have turned heads for the wrong reasons. Her teeth may have scared off the faint-hearted, but her presence, unmatched. Elizabeth didn't need a perfect mouth to speak command into the world. She didn't need a kiss to seduce an empire. She ruled hearts not with touch, but with terror, tenderness, and total control. And maybe, just maybe, that's more romantic than any rose. The sun hangs low over Richmond Palace, casting long golden shadows on the Thames. Inside, behind closed and curtained windows, Elizabeth I sits in silence. It is the year 1603. She's nearly 70, and England's lioness is withering. The court, once brimming with music, whispers only. Her once fierce voice has softened to a hoarse hush. Her courtiers tread lightly, as if her body might fracture beneath their gaze. Because now the illusion is failing, and the stench of death, like all other stenches before it, cannot be perfumed away. By this point in her life, Elizabeth is more waxwork than woman. She has built herself into a legend, the Virgin Queen, mother to her people, untouched by age or pain. But her body, like every body, betrays her. The signs have been there for years. The thickening of her makeup, the increased time spent in chambers, the ever-tightening circle of trusted attendants. Now, there are no more progresses, no more late-night dances. She sits, often upright in a chair, unwilling to be seen lying down. Her skin, under the leaded layers of ceruse, is pocked and sallow. Her hair, long since gone, has been replaced entirely by wigs that now feel heavier than her own crown. Her back aches. Her fingers, once ringed in gold, tremble, and yet she refuses her bed. For days, then weeks. She will not lie down. She will not be put to rest. She fears, perhaps rightly, that if she lies down she may never rise again. Even her attendants cannot deny the change. Her smell is different now. It clings not only to her clothing, but to the room itself. The mingling of age, decay, old powder and illness creates a scent that even their strongest perfumes cannot mask. They change her linens daily. They bathe her in warmed rosewater and vinegar as always. But the rot is from within now, and there is no masking that. The royal physicians attend her, fussing with tonics and teas suggesting rest, offering opiates. She refuses most. She distrusts the idea of sleep. She does not want dreams. She does not want to appear weak. For her, weakness is not just personal, it is political. And in these final days she remains deeply political. Her council presses her to name a successor. She will not openly. To admit an heir is to admit an end. And so she says little, gestures vaguely, and retreats into a stubborn silence that mirrors the quiet surrounding her. Only her most trusted remain, her ladies-in-waiting, who for decades have powdered her face, bathed her feet, cleaned her close stool, now watch helplessly. Some weep quietly behind doors, others pray. They maintain her rituals even as the Queen ceases to recognise their purpose. The gowns are still laid out, the perfume still dabbed on her gloves, but she does not dress. She does not move. She simply watches. One day she insists on sitting for hours in her coronation robes. No one knows why. Perhaps she senses the end and wishes to remind herself of the beginning. Perhaps she fears that her crown, once removed, might vanish forever. The robes are heavy, too heavy. She trembles beneath them but endures. When she does allow herself to be undressed, her body is startling, thin, pale, bruised in places. Her limbs, once strong from endless hours of dancing, now move only with effort. The sores on her legs have worsened. Her appetite is gone. Her breath, always a battlefield, is now faint and dry like wind through dead leaves. And yet she holds on. Doctors beg her to rest, to lie in bed, to take their medicine. She refuses. Her bed draped in finery sits unused. She sleeps upright or not at all. Her final days are spent in fitful half-consciousness, staring into the middle distance, mouthing prayers or fragments of song. Fringe accounts speak of visions, that she spoke to ghosts, that she saw Dudley, her lost favourite, standing at the edge of her room, that she muttered to her father, Henry VIII, asking if she had ruled well enough. These stories are unconfirmed, but they reflect a deeper truth. The queen who ruled with symbols now lives entirely within them, and then one morning she is still. Her ladies find her silent, eyes closed, still seated. She had finally allowed herself to rest. She had not summoned them for hours, and though her body remains upright, it is clear something has changed. She has moved gently to her bed. Her death is not announced immediately. The court cannot afford panic. The scent of incense fills the room, thick and suffocating. It is not for her, but for those around her, to hide the smell of what's already begun. Her body, still layered in powder and perfume, begins to loosen its grip on illusion. The courtiers file in, heads bowed. The physicians murmur prayers. The ladies wipe her hands, now cold and unadorned with rosewater. Her wig is removed. Her face, pale beneath the paint, is untouched for the first time in decades. She is, at last, bare. And still she commands awe. The funeral is grand. A procession of white horses, a coffin draped in cloth of gold. Her effigy, carved to resemble her younger self, is paraded through the streets of London. The people weep. The nobles bow. They remember the queen of power, not of powder. The woman who ruled for 44 years, who defeated the Spanish Armada, who spoke like thunder and danced like flame. But her ladies remember something else. They remember the vinegar baths, the close stool and scented gloves, the whispered instructions to hide her blemishes, the nightly rituals, the smell of ceruse and civet, the slow fade behind heavy curtains. They remember how much it took to make Elizabeth divine. And when the perfumes fade and the body's interred, what remains is the truth of all rulers, that they are human, that beneath the robes and jewels they sweat, they ache, they fear. Elizabeth's legacy is immaculate, her body less so. But in a way, that's the greatest trick of all. She fooled an entire world into seeing her as something more, and in doing so, she became something more. Her scent may have horrified, her hygiene may have been medieval, but her myth, unstoppable. By the time Elizabeth's tomb is sealed in Westminster Abbey, the mythology surrounding her has already taken root. Her portraits remain in palaces, her speeches echo in memory, and her name is spoken with reverence across Europe. But beneath the layers of legend lies a persistent, uncomfortable question. Just how bad did she really smell? Centuries later, historians find themselves wrestling not with matters of war or policy, but with odour. Elizabeth's hygiene habits have become a strange fascination. Her aversion to bathing, her love of perfumes, the lead-based makeup, the questionable dental situation, all these add up to a sensory mystery. And like most mysteries of the Tudor world, the answers are murky, contradictory, and tinged with exaggeration. The surviving evidence is frustratingly indirect. There are no first-hand scent descriptions that survive in gory detail. No one, not even her enemies, wrote extensively about the smell of Elizabeth's person, and that's suspicious in itself. Foreign ambassadors, often eager to criticise, say little about her personal odour. Could it be that she smelled acceptable? Some historians argue exactly that. They point out that by the standards of her time, Elizabeth may have been relatively clean. She changed her linen underclothes frequently. She used rosewater for hand and face rinsing. She relied on vinegar, herbal infusions, and perfumed gloves. Compared to the average Tudor noble, let alone the peasantry, she likely maintained a higher baseline of freshness. After all, she was the queen. She had resources. She had servants whose entire job was to make sure she didn't offend the senses. And context matters. In an era without indoor plumbing, hot showers, or antibacterial soap, scent expectations were radically different. What modern noses would find unbearable was likely invisible to her contemporaries. Body odour wasn't a source of shame, it was a fact of life. The heavily scented atmosphere of court life, a blend of people, herbs, animals, and rot, normalised the abnormal. Still, others remain sceptical. They highlight her use of ceruse, a lead-based cosmetic that clogged pores and irritated skin, likely trapping oils and sweat beneath the surface. They point to her reliance on perfume not as enhancement, but as camouflage. They cite the dental decay, the lack of bathing, and the heavy, unwashed gowns. Taken together, they argue, it's impossible she didn't carry a certain pungency. And then there's the fringe view, the camp of historians and amateur sleuths who suggest that Elizabeth's cleanliness has been exaggerated over time to preserve her image. They posit that her supposed monthly baths were ceremonial more than effective, that she, like many of her peers, was essentially a walking blend of rosewater, sweat, and political willpower. But even among experts, there's little agreement. The record is too incomplete, too sanitised by courtiers and artists. Elizabeth's carefully curated image extended into every corner of her public presence. Her letters were strategic, her portraits edited, her personal accounts guarded. If she smelled, no one dared write it down. One tantalising clue comes from a letter written by a visiting French noble. He praises her charm and intellect, but notes, cryptically, that one must stand at respectful distance to best admire Her Majesty's effect. It's a subtle jab, possibly at her makeup, her breath, or her scent, but we can't know for sure. And so the debate continues. Some modern biographers speculate that Elizabeth's love of scented gloves and constant use of handkerchiefs weren't merely fashionable choices, they were defensive tools, shields, her way of managing proximity, deflecting attention from her body, and asserting control over how she was perceived. This idea aligns with what we know about her psychological approach to rule. She was obsessive about her image, fiercely private and deeply aware of symbolism. She used clothing, gesture, and speech as weapons. Why wouldn't she use scent the same way? It's also possible that Elizabeth, like many powerful people, simply became desensitized. After decades of ceruse and civet, her senses dulled. Her attendants, forced to adjust, might have come to view the Queen's aroma as part of her aura. Not unpleasant, just uniquely hers. Still, it's worth remembering that perception, especially in history, is often shaped by contrast. Compared to the common folk, who bathed perhaps once or twice a year, shared living space with livestock, and used straw for bedding, Elizabeth was practically a model of hygiene. But compared to modern standards, she doesn't stand a chance. That contrast has become fuel for countless articles, TV shows, and social media threads. The Virgin Queen's hygiene is a favourite punchline. Half fact, half fantasy. The idea of a monarch so powerful yet so unwashed is too delicious for the modern imagination to resist. And so, her memory is trapped somewhere between reverence and ridicule. But maybe that's fitting. Elizabeth built her legend on contradiction. She was a queen who ruled like a king, a virgin who flirted like a courtesan, a public figure who hid her private life with iron discipline. That her cleanliness, or lack thereof, should remain a mystery feels almost intentional. The scholarly debate reflects larger questions too. What do we demand from our heroes? Do we want them to be perfect? Human? Both? Elizabeth was never afraid of playing with perception. If people thought she glowed, that was enough. If they imagined her as fresh as a spring bloom, so much the better. Truth was less important than effect, and in a way, that illusion endures. We still study her face, paint her image, quote her speeches. Her scent, however horrific it may have been, has vanished into the ether. We are left only with the stories, and the questions. Was she cleaner than her people? Dirtier than we imagine? Somewhere in between? Historians may never agree. But if you asked Elizabeth herself, she'd likely arch one perfect eyebrow, lift her gloved hand for a kiss, and say nothing at all. Because queens never explain. The war of stench begins not in silence, but with an undeniable presence, a slow, creeping awareness that the air in the room has turned thick. It isn't the roses, it isn't the incense, it's something denser, sourer, more human. In a court where cleanliness is an illusion and perfumes are defensive strategies, one question eventually hangs heavy among the tapestries. Who or what smelled the worst? Elizabethan herself, or the court she ruled? Let's start with the Queen. By now the details are familiar. The rare bathing, the unwashed gowns, the powdered wigs, the decaying teeth. Her body, covered in a paste of leaden vinegar, layered with perfumed oils and tightly corseted beneath gowns that hadn't met water in years, was certainly not fragrant by modern standards. She masked her scent with elaborate rituals, herbs in sleeves, gloves soaked in civet, daily changes of linen. And yet, for all her quirks, Elizabeth had a singular advantage: control. Unlike her courtiers, she could demand fresh linens, private washing basins, the finest imported perfumes. She could clear her chamber of anyone unclean. She could retreat when the air grew heavy, order lavender strewn across rush-covered floors, and command silence from anyone who noticed the sharp tang of decay beneath the civet. Her court, on the other hand, was a living miasma. Imagine 400 courtiers packed into a single great hall. No plumbing, few windows, dozens of animals, dogs, horses, even pet monkeys, roaming the palace. Food spilling on floors, chamber pots under beds, unwashed velvet, the reek of animal fat candles, and lace collars yellowed by time and sweat. The combined scent of hundreds of nobles, all wearing week-old gowns and perfumed gloves, creates a fog not even a dozen pomanders can cut through. Body odour in the Elizabethan court wasn't an embarrassment, it was an epidemic. Each noble had their own olfactory signature. Some favoured floral blends, rose and violet. Others preferred heavier notes, musk, myrrh, patchouli. When these combined in close quarters, the effect was less like a garden and more like a potpourri factory explosion. Add in the smell of gout, infected sores, rotting teeth, and lice-ridden wigs, and you begin to understand the atmosphere. One visitor from Italy described the English court as fragrant, but not in the way of flowers. A Spanish ambassador joked that the perfume of the English is like their politics, layered, overpowering, and difficult to navigate. The worst offenders were not always the poorest. In fact, some of the highest-ranking nobles reeked the most. Their wealth afforded them layers, gown over gown, cloak over doublet, but not cleanliness. Washing was still viewed with suspicion. To bathe too often was to risk illness. Better, they believed, to coat the body in powders and wrap it in linen. And if the Queen ever noticed? She said nothing, because to address the issue would be to admit that the court itself was not divine, that her rule existed atop a mound of perfumed rot. Even so, comparisons emerge. Who, among her inner circle, carried the worst stench? There's Lord Burghley, her chief adviser, known for his intellect, and for rarely changing his robe. He wore the same writing gown for years, patched and restuffed with herbs, believing it brought him luck. His chambers reportedly reeked of parchment, pipe smoke, and old wool. Then there was Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, handsome, brash, beloved by the Queen. He bathed more than most, twice a month by some accounts, but wore layers of musk so thick that it clung to furniture long after he left the room. Servants called his quarters the lion's den, not for courage, but for the musky growl of his presence. And of course, there were the ladies in waiting. Dressed in silks and lace, they were expected to exude refinement. Yet beneath the beauty were stockings never laundered, corsets never loosened, and wigs that housed entire ecosystems. They slept in shared rooms with chamber pots tucked beneath beds. The air was dense, the sleep light, the scent unforgettable. One of the lesser-known culprits, the royal musicians. They played for hours in tight, overheated halls, sweating into their instruments, often sleeping in their clothing. By the end of a 3-day masque, they smelled less like melody and more like misery. So who wins the title of worst? Was it the Queen, with her month's unwashed gowns and mercury-laced face? Or her court, where the average noble smelled like a stew of venison, wet wool, and unwashed ambition? Some historians suggest Elizabeth may have, paradoxically, been the freshest among them, if only because she had the means and will to mask her natural scent more effectively. Her constant control of her image extended to her olfactory signature. She demanded perfume, imposed distance, and enforced rituals. But others argue that all the perfume in the world can't hide decay, that under the gloves, the lead paint, and the smiles, the Queen's body betrayed her. Fringe theories propose that Elizabeth's body odour, intensified by stress, menopause, and decaying health, was quietly acknowledged but never recorded out of fear. Some even claim her ceremonial gowns, heavy with pearls and cloth of gold, were aired not just to preserve fabric, but to dissipate scent. The truth, likely somewhere in between. What's clear is that Elizabeth understood the power of smell, its impact, its symbolism, its political utility. She once reportedly said, "A subject may lie, but a scent never does." Whether or not she truly said this, the quote has been used to justify her obsession with perfume. It fits. In a court built on appearances, scent was the final frontier, and Elizabeth, ever the strategist, ruled it with as much intensity as she did her people. So, the verdict? In the contest of stench, there is no clear victor, only victims. Elizabeth stank, her court stank. The palace stank. But together they created a uniquely Tudor bouquet, a scent that lingered in hallways, history books, and, if we're being honest, your imagination right now. And that may be the most Elizabethan thing of all. The tomb stands cool and quiet beneath Westminster Abbey's high arches, a sanctuary of carved stone and flickering candles. Here lies Elizabeth I, entombed beside her half-sister Mary, a pairing history did not predict, nor the Queen herself likely approve. Yet as visitors pass, they rarely ponder the centuries of scent that surrounded this woman in life. They see the effigy, the inscriptions, the velvet ropes. Few imagine the smell of rosewater and lead, of unwashed linen and lavender sachets, of the Virgin Queen as she truly was, layered, perfumed, proud, and slightly pungent. But her legend lives on, not in spite of these details, but because of them. Elizabeth's hygiene, as horrifying as it may seem to modern noses, is more than a trivia fact. It's a lens, a way into the world she ruled, a testament to the power of image in a time when most people smelled like yesterday's soup. For 44 years she cloaked herself in symbols, pearls, makeup, Latin mottos and perfume. Every choice was calculated, every layer deliberate, and despite the grime, the decay, the rot behind the ruffs, it worked. Even her critics couldn't deny the effect. She commanded loyalty, fear and admiration. She fended off Spanish invasions, unified a fractured country, and turned her body into a national symbol. And like all symbols, it had to be polished, or powdered, or masked with civet. When we remember Elizabeth, we picture the portraits. The pale, regal face, the ruffled collar, the glint of gold. We forget, or never knew, that beneath the paint was skin that hadn't met soap in weeks. That under the dress was a body that feared water, a mouth full of ruin, and a wig resting on a scalp possibly crawling with lice. Historians debate how much of her filth was real, and how much was rumour. But perhaps the truth doesn't matter as much as what we choose to believe. The fact that we still care, still wonder how she smelled, is itself a testament to her myth-making mastery. The Virgin Queen's scent was her final veil, and like everything else she wore, it was designed not for comfort, but for control. In the centuries since her death, that veil has frayed. We've peeled it back layer by layer, examining her cosmetics, her letters, her wardrobe, her bathwater, or lack thereof. We've laughed, winced, and wondered. But in doing so, we've only come closer to the truth of her humanity. She wasn't a goddess. She was a woman who turned herself into one, and what of the people who lived in her shadow? Her courtiers, who aped her habits, copied her fashions, and stank together beneath her chandeliers. They too are part of the myth. A royal court that glittered from a distance but groaned with grime up close. They embraced her vision, played their parts, and inhaled the same thick air. Elizabeth's hygiene, or lack thereof, is not a personal failure. It's a cultural reality. In her time, scent and cleanliness were not synonymous. Clean didn't mean scrubbed. It meant powdered, perfumed, and presentable. It meant no visible dirt. It meant linen underlayers and invisible effort. And while the Queen may have recoiled from a bathtub, she immersed herself fully in the theatre of appearances. If that required bathing in rose petals once a month and soaking gloves in animal musk, so be it. The crown demanded nothing less. As we close this strange, fragrant journey through her world, we are left not with a single scent, but a blend of lead and lavender, of silk and sweat, of rose petals and resolve. It is the odour of survival, of illusion, of sovereignty. Elizabeth I ruled with a body as flawed and fragrant as any of ours. And somehow she turned that body into a symbol of immortality. That, more than any perfume, is what lingers. So now, as the torches dim in those echoing palace halls, and the perfume finally fades from the velvet sleeves, we let the legend rest. Elizabeth is gone, but her scent, both literal and symbolic, has drifted down through time, mingling fact with fascination. We've walked through her routines, her rot, her rituals, and her richly aromatic legacy. Take a breath now, yes, a real one, and exhale the lead, the civet, the centuries of ceremonial stink. Let it go. Let your own world, fresh with eucalyptus soap and laundry detergent, ground you again. Close your eyes and picture her, not as a painting, not as a monarch, but as a woman wrapped in silk and secrets, navigating a world where survival was masked in powder and perfume. Remember her not only for her triumphs and speeches, but for the quiet, uncomfortable humanity beneath it all. Let the rushes crunch beneath your feet. Let the cool rose water soothe your hands. Let the echo of her voice, sharp and wry, fade into a sigh. And with that, dear night owl, it's time to settle in. The past has spoken. The Queen has departed. All that's left is the hush of linen, the soft tick of candle wax, and the gentle drift into sleep.